the webinar today is really to discuss how to achieve optimal business agility in these uncertain times. So we've got a great panel together to discuss this, and I suppose really what we're looking to do is to just discuss really what some of the ramifications of the pandemic have been over the last 12 months and what managers have had to think about really to operate in a more agile, almost deconstructed fashion. I think it's fair to say that far from just thinking about one's disaster recovery planning as it pertains to the headquarters, to the office, firms now are having to think about how that extends to the home office, and really how each employee's home has become a de facto satellite office. Obviously, that's proven to be remarkably resilient thanks to technology, specifically the cloud. But I think what we want to discuss on this panel today are some of the factors that firms still need to consider in order to future-proof their businesses and guard against ongoing IT and specifically cybersecurity risks. So it should be a fascinating discussion, and as I say, I'm delighted to have my panelists on board. I'll introduce each of them and then I'll allow them respectively to just give a very quick introduction to their respective roles. So we have George Ralph. George is the Managing Director of RFA in London, and George has spoken on many of our events and panels, so delighted to have George on board today. We've also got Robert Higginston. Robert is the partner and evocatively gatekeeper at Par Equity, so maybe Robert can explain that role. And also Jacob Mullins, and Jacob is a partner at Shasta VC in the Bay Area. So gentlemen, thank you for your time today. And George, I'll let you kick off with a quick intro. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, James. So I'll talk a little bit about myself very briefly. I've been in the industry for about 24 years, various guises, starting off with things like Novell E-Tree and OS2 and the old BNC connectors, cutting my teeth. I remember with the VMware binary code before it was commercial, building cloud platforms. Too young to realize that actually there was some money to be made with cloud back then. Kind of got disenfranchised with IT service management, became an outsourced COO, getting involved in JVs and M&As and things, helping do cyber audits for investors, which is what got me into this space. So some of the things I get my hands dirty on these days as RFA is very much about doing auditing for investors, but also due diligence for the managers that we look after and the portfolio companies of the PE firms. RFA itself, we've been around for about 32 years. Essentially, we're here to deliver what a CTO or CISO would normally be responsible for, everything from corporate IT like files and emails and things like that, and the security of those, all the way through to risk management processes, application strategy, data warehousing, things like that. So I'm going to talk about what we're seeing across some of our client base today, try and give some feedback as to sort of the general view of things and what to do and what not to do, lessons learned, things like that.
Yeah, thank you very much, George. That's great. Robert, I'll go to you next.
Yes, Robert Higginson, Par Equity. I split my time between Edinburgh, where we have our main office, and New York, where I'm currently speaking from. My originated out of a software role, writing software, real-time systems a very, very long time ago, graduated into developing hardware and communication systems for a variety of different companies around the world. So my background is kind of heavy tech, and fast forwarding to 15 years ago, we formed Par Equity, a venture capital firm, to invest in those kind of cutting edge technologies and to commercialize them. And I was given this title, kind of gatekeeper, which I guess you guys would think of as head of origination, which these days is very much democratized across the whole firm. My focus is very much on advanced technology and commercializing it for the firm as an investor. But because I'm the most technical guy in the firm, I also get to be responsible for technology at Par Equity. And so, which is why I was asked to come onto this call, which I'm very delighted to do.
Thank you very much, Robert. Yeah, pleasure to have you on board. And Jacob, I'll round off with you.
Great. Good morning, everyone from San Francisco. My name is Jacob Mullins. I'm a managing director at Shasta Ventures. We're a venture capital firm that's been around for 16 years. And throughout our lifespan have invested in enterprise software companies in that transition from mainframe, obviously into distributed internet, into mobile, into cloud. And so we're investing in a lot of the companies that are both enabling enterprises to become more efficient as they operate both horizontally as well as vertical industries. Cybersecurity is a huge focus for us. And so excited to be a part of this panel and discuss how many of our companies are seeing growth across the enterprise. And then internally here at Shasta, we are a small shop, about 5 investing partners and 20 total people in the company. And so we work pretty agilely, I would say, and in the pandemic have really accelerated our own adoption of distributed collaboration tools as well. So we can talk about those.
Excellent. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, everybody. And just for the audience's benefit, if there are any questions that you might have over the next 50 minutes, then just feel free to add them into the comments box, and I'll be happy to take a few as we go through the discussions. So yeah, if anything that you hear prompts you to ask a question, please do so, and that'd be great to have your involvement today. I think we'll just kind of kick off. There are a few different sections of this discussion that I'd like to focus on, and Jacob's just alluded to agile working, and that's really the first area that I'd like to dive into. Really, I suppose I'll maybe go to George just to kick off in terms of what you've seen over the last 12 months, George, as firms have had to adjust to this move away from the main office, as it were, to having to VP into the office from their home environments. What have you seen your clients do and adapt to that quite unique challenge? Yeah, I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I think it's such a wide subject, right? And I on these conversations, I always end up slipping into conversations about mental health, so I'm going to try not to go there until we're forced into it. But I think the key thing, if you're thinking about operational stability of a business, you're thinking about risks to the business of major upheaval, emotional staff, uncertainty about where things are going when they're coming back to the office, all of that kind of thing. I think what I've tried to do with all of our clients is to try and get out of this mentality of home working and really help the technology leads and the operational leads think more about it as multiple satellite offices and think about the responsibilities they have both for their data but also to looking after the staff. And some of the things we've done, I know that we've talked about this before, is trying to get some form of engagement with staff, using collaboration tools, keeping people engaged, getting them up and about. We've left coming into the office voluntary for all of our staff globally, so that if people need to get out of the house, they can. They've got somewhere to go. Although in New York, when you're on the 20th floor and the lifts are all closed because of COVID, that tends not to happen. So trying to shift mindset really is one of the main things I'd say. The other thing I would say is that there's a big focus on the decentralization of cybersecurity, which I think we'll probably go into quite a lot today. Really thinking about the traditional security around perimeter controls, firewalls, firewall policies, VPNing in, as you rightly said, split tunneling, stuff like that. It's been more about shifting the security controls and prevention techniques to everything from training, user understanding of the risks, to things like endpoint security, switching from just using traditional antivirus, anti-malware to actually using behavioral analysis. so that HR teams can start getting information about how people are using the computers, which then leads into helping with bad leavers, because if you're meeting someone over a coffee in the morning, you can kind of tell if someone's unhappy in their role, which is very difficult to do when everyone's in a different location. So using things like behavioral analysis tools, looking at what information they're looking at productivity changes. And that comes on to another point we'll probably talk about today around data management and the centralization of that and views into data. Obviously collaboration tools, I mean, the way we're talking now. Jacob, Robert, you and I, we probably would have had 5 coffees together by now talking about what we're going to talk about and changing all the agenda completely. But now, you know, we've just come online, we're doing this, we can't see any of the audience that's listening. You know, it's just a different way of working that we're all having to get used to. And a lot of the conversations I've had where, you know, I think that's really positive is it's kind of pushed people to get more engaged with collaboration tools like this. The ability to connect from anywhere, you know, be it due diligence with investors, which is pretty tough over stuff like this, but spending time talking to people more. You know, myself, I organised a Saturday afternoon Zoom with all of my family, which probably means I speak to my brothers more than I ever did before. So there's lots of positives, but then you've got the negatives where people are saying, oh no, you know, we're secure because we save all of our video conferencing to the Zoom cloud. And you're thinking, well, hang on, if they've got that, you know, and then the WhatsApp, data governance, all of this kind of stuff that people are starting to think about. And then I think the other thing is about how, you know, we as employers are responsible for our data and the staff, as I was saying at the beginning, and thinking about how we're securing people's home network. So just giving tips, making sure they're not using the default passwords on the routers that are printed on the bottom of them. You know, should or shouldn't certain people in the organization be printing documents to read and sign them? You know, should be using DocuSign and these kind of good tools. So I think there's a lot of content we could cover today, and I'm conscious that I tend to talk a lot. So we'll move on to the next point. But I think those are the kind of top pieces that I think are worth talking about.
I just want to make a point on before I come to Jacob and Robert, with the you referred to productivity. You know, people, how do you know if your employees are being productive, that if they're happy, their well-being? As much as there are many benefits to the way that people are operating and working today, more collaboration, getting to know their portfolio companies more intimately, getting to know their own teams more intimately even. But there is a downside to this agility point, in that you can't necessarily know if people are, you know, doing what they should be doing, and you know, agility is good to a certain extent, but there are limitations, I guess. That's kind of what I'm getting at there.
You're drawing us back into the mental health conversation, I feel.
Sorry.
I think it's interesting because I was talking to someone about this yesterday. And, you know, as an organization, I'm questioned quite a lot by clients who are growing fast because we've got, you know, 300 odd staff. Whereas if you're a PE firm with 20, 25, but your end goal might be that you're going to be bigger than Blackstone and have 1,200 staff, which is probably not very operationally efficient. They kind of want to know how I've dealt with starters and leavers and things like that. It's quite nice to be able to bounce ideas. But I was talking to someone yesterday. It would be very interesting once we get out of lockdown and get into some sense of normality again, to do some kind of survey as to people who have joined businesses during lockdown and never met anyone physically. What is the ratio of staff churn now for people like that versus those that were in the business beforehand? And I think we'll find there's a massive percentage increase. It's a difficult one to measure, but
no, it's a very interesting area, and I know we shouldn't, maybe we'll move the conversation along, but it does open up an interesting discussion on what we mean about agile business, and you know, outlining what some of the potential pitfalls are, as well as the numerous benefits. I'll go to Robert though, just to get a sense, Robert, from how Power Equity have responded over the last 12 months to agile working, and also, Robert, how you feel about the way technology is maybe helping your team in terms of morale and so on, and productivity. So I'll kind of let you share your views on that.
Yeah, I think there's 3 points I want to make. First, just to let the audience know, Power Equity are less than 20 people. So we're tiny, working across 3 geographies, different time zones. I think from a chronological perspective, of course, if we look back at March last year, it was a little shock. And very fortunately, our technology was already in place to work any place, anytime, anywhere. So we were very, very fortunate. And some people might have thought, as a technologist, I'd rather gold-plated our technology at that point in time. But I think they were quite relieved to find that, you know, come one day after we locked down, everything worked. Touch wood, still does. I think I'll make 3 points, and I won't go over the human factors one again, because James and Georgie both covered it. But I do really want to, throughout my sort of comments in this particular session, really want to emphasize it's all about the people. And we always say that at Power Equity, it's the people are building businesses, people are investing in businesses, people are obviously financing them. So it is all about the people, and it's all about our small team. So initially, if we look at the chronological set of events, you know, it's a bit of a shock. People were anxious about working from home. They were worried about simple things, about what they'd look like on the camera or what their backdrop looked like, and simple things like that. And it was really my job, really, to make sure that that technology wouldn't get in their way, that it would be really transparent to them, and it wouldn't add to their, you know, all their problems of this lockdown. So that's my first point. Second point really is then technology can often be a frustration. I'm sure as we've all got up sometime in the morning and the VPN doesn't work or whatever it might be, or the hotel's got some kind of firewall, it can be a frustration. It can be a drag on performance. And so I've really pushed to make sure that the infrastructure could be as good at home as it is on the move, as it is in the office. It is completely just transparent. And, you know, I'm sure the guys, if they were listening to this call, would be sniggering to say, well, he didn't do that very well. But, you know, we all know as technologists, it's really kind of hard to make it all work completely transparently, but that's the goal of which we've actually pushed for. So simple things, you know, because we're small, everybody's now got a company phone, everybody's got home broadband, everybody's got a Power Equity router. You know, if they have a problem, they don't call BT or Virgin, they just call our helpline, and we just deal with that for them. We just take it away, take all that problem away that is a drag on their performance and a frustration. And I guess the third point really is that Power Equity is a small firm, and we're growing awful fast in terms of deploying capital, looking at lots of companies. And really, I wanted technology to be able to allow the team to scale, to be able to handle larger amounts of capital, really to handle that kind of heavier workload without feeling isolated. You know, they weren't able to go, as George says, by the coffee machine and have a coffee and a moan. You know, how do you share that worry that you've got a lot on your plate as the business scales? And how do you put technologies in place for that? And how do you put in regular meetings and well-being, back to the well-being point, and to make sure people do feel part of one big team, albeit they've got more work and they're at home. So that's my 3 main points.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Yeah, I'm just making a couple of points there. That's I'm going to bring Jacob in there to get your thoughts, Jacob, on. Yeah, I mean, traditionally, especially for a VC firm like yourself and like Robert at Power Equity, and to all of the audience, you know, there's a lot of benefit to the whole kind of water cooler kind of mentality of sharing ideas in the office and bouncing off one another, and that you can't underestimate the importance of that. But how do you maintain that when people are working remotely, sharing ideas, sharing concerns that they may have as you look to scale the business? And Jacob, I know that you've found some benefit to using different communication tools just to maybe reinforce perhaps the way that you operate, and maybe this will be part of maybe a permanent way that Shasta operates even going forward.
Yeah, that's right. I think we have moved forward for the benefit. Obviously, the first month or so was shocking, but the business that we would, our course of business is meeting on Mondays for our partner meeting, typically handling all of the business of the firm, and then Tuesday through Friday is mostly working with portfolio companies, sourcing new deals, due diligence, and other external things. And what that did was really just that kind of a weekly cadence. And now, because we don't have that in-person time, I find we're communicating at a much higher rate, much more real time, which makes the business move forward in a number of ways. And so, the conversation I would normally have a water cooler talk on, I now pick up my iPhone and I FaceTime someone to see if I can catch them. And if I don't catch them, actually, there's a low bar of expectation. That's totally fine if I don't catch them. But if I do catch them, it can be a fast exchange. It can be equally as fast. Hey, 3 minutes. This is what I was thinking about. What do you think? And move on. And I find we're using group text messages to have group text messages in kind of titled in different sections, on different categories. So we can just have very linear conversations on different topics more quickly. Our diligence process used to be kind of spread between paper as well as some online materials. And now it's largely done in either a SharePoint document and then distributed in Slack. And so in Slack, you can go and find all of the resources very quickly and centrally, which we kind of wished we did before, but nobody ever had the drive to do it. And so it really has pushed us forward in communication. And then on the deal making side, it's been challenging, but we're getting over it. We all obviously want to sit and have a coffee with the people we want to invest in, but we have made a number of investments in the pandemic, having never met someone before. And our investment strategy has shifted a little bit on potentially smaller checks, sharing rounds, just to lower risk a bit. But on the whole, we're continuing, forward. So then the last piece is kind of on team morale, and George, we opened with it, but the mental side of it's very important. And so one of the things we're thinking about is, we do a quarterly, actually we have one next Thursday, get together with the team, and we send wine and cheese. But we found when the team needs to have if it's just the team, it's awkward, right? It's your entire team staring at each other, trying to figure out what are we going to talk about. Everybody's watching the clock. And so what we've done is actually find a facilitator in the form of a wine tasting expert, a cheesemonger. This week is a chocolatier who sent us their wares. And the chocolatier is going to talk us through for 45 minutes about the chocolate. So we can just kind of sit back and listen and pipe in, which really takes that mental energy off of us individually, but still lets us enjoy time with each other. So, really thinking through how do we evolve. But I think for us, there's been a lot of benefit.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I suppose that's really thinking about agility in terms of your own team building, really, and taking a bit of that pressure away, and bringing, again, who would have thought about virtual wine tasting or eating cheese? It's just this is the world that we live in. So
totally.
But that's really fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of great place to kick off there for that first section. I'd like to maybe get a sense of any aspects of automation that have been introduced to your respective firms again over the last 12 months, and whether there would be any example you might be able to share with the audience. Jacob, could I go to you just briefly on that point? Has there been any emphasis on where you've looked to introduce, as I say, a bit more process automation at Shasta?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's actually a spot we're hunting in as an investment thesis in the back office. So finance, compliance audit for automation right now. I think internally, the closest we've got is trying to create a lot more process around probably our limited partner communications. Prior, it seemed to it wasn't haphazard, but it was much, kind of in a, when we have something to say, we spin up emails and everybody does this automatic, and now we're looking at tools like HubSpot, like Salesforce, actually, I forget the name, but we're looking at a tool next week that will help automate SPV formation, information distribution, document collection a lot easier. Because it's with the proliferation of the digital world, everybody's just becoming more efficient, which means information flows faster, and it just creates bigger issues. So we are looking at it primarily in our back office functions, finance and LP communications.
Got it. Yeah, got it. Robert, anything that you would point to that you've introduced at Par Equity?
I wouldn't say introduced over the last 12 months, but what we have done is heavily invested in our client management and transaction systems, which we had built, classic, techie. I ended up building something which I've been telling people they should never build things. They should buy and screw them together. But I ended up building something just having looked at 2 off-the-shelf solutions before. So we built our client management systems and our transaction systems, which are a company of less than 20, is possibly a bit insane. We've invested heavily, or more heavily, since the COVID crisis to improve on the functionality of those. Also the training of those, particularly for our entrepreneurs and clients, because we were a very, very physically high touch kind of business with our clients in the past. So examples that won't mean something to your audience would be something like an EIS form distribution, which is big in the UK. So a lot of our clients are EIS investors, and they want all that form distribution. When we take on clients, all that KYC, AML, investor declaration, sometimes clients used to come in and we used to take them through some of that paperwork and they used to sign it. But of course, they couldn't do that. And so we've expanded our client base hugely since COVID. And so they've had to do all that remotely. So we've invested heavily on our client management systems. On the transaction side, to Jacob's point, we've clearly had to do all of that rather than meeting teams face to face. We don't do that. Some of the stuff was recorded before, but now everything's recorded, and we're very slick about how we edit that and get that out to our clients to actually, and our advisory panel, our DD panels, to look at that. So that's all on the transaction side of things. So that's we used to have, for example, an investment committee once a week. Now we have it once a day. Again, just to increase the amount of discussion around particular deals, because you just miss that constant interaction. So again, very fortunately, we had the infrastructure in place, but we've really just ramped up our investment in both the client side and the transaction side.
Got it. Yeah. Some good examples there, actually. George, what have you seen? I know it depends on the size of the manager, but have you tended to see more automation on the back end? Or
it's literally our world at the moment. Automation and data centralization with things like Snowflake and stuff is just everything that we're talking about with our clients, right? And if you think about large or small firms, there are elements of automation that you should just avoid where there's a risk to the business. Someone said to me the other day, why don't you just automate when someone creates a ticket, you could just automatically give them a default response based on the text that's in the ticket that they raise. And I'm thinking, but you can't. What if someone says my printer doesn't work and they've got an investor coming in the next 2 minutes and the investor wants it printed out? That's the most important thing in the world to that person. You couldn't have a computer decide it was low risk because it's a printer. So it doesn't necessarily work for a company like ours, but we've been using automation for ourselves and for our clients for quite a while, doing things like all of the basics from sort of email scraping. So when someone does like meeting notes in OneNote or Evernote, we've got automation tools that scrape the email for the action points and then create sort of Microsoft to-dos or Outlook to-dos, tasks, things like that, to make sure they're tracked. But now that so many people are using Teams Jacob mentioned Slack, these kind of tools which have become the interfaces to our business. We as a business are doing things like trying to get rid of email traffic because there's such amounts of email right now. People are becoming slightly adverse to picking up the phone because they're scared of confrontation because they're not getting it. And so email traffic's growing. So what we've been trying to do is automate processes between us and our clients, for us internally and for the clients, to do things like create Teams channels so that when they've got computer issues, it can automatically go into a Teams message, which then flows into our systems and vice versa. And then really helping clients use better interfaces, whether they've got a data warehouse at the back end or not, to automate some of those spreadsheet processes. So not as far as someone standing up and going, Bob, can you make that payment, please? But for things like, there's a lot of compensation programs that are done in spreadsheets, so that they're looking at the deals, they're looking at the monetary values, then they're trying to work out the comp plans for people. We've tried to automate a lot of that by using things like Power BI, so people have got dashboards so they know what to expect at the end of the year. Using Teams and SharePoint to build things like deal site automation, which is what we called it, very original, whereby when they've got a new deal coming in, they go to the Microsoft form page, which can be presented in any way to the client. They populate all the details about the deal, and it automatically adds the deal team for that deal. It creates a Teams channel, the secure data categorization in SharePoint for the files, so that someone's not sitting there going, right, who's part of the deal? What's the email address? All of these things that you would probably do in front of a whiteboard each time you took on a new deal, you can automate, and they're kind of low risk items. So it's a huge thing at the moment. Some other examples, I think, doing, third party due diligence and things that the guys mentioned, having a Microsoft form that you can give to the third party so that it can't be printed, it can't be downloaded, they're populating it online, it comes back, it's not being spread around the world via email. All of this kind of stuff is really, it's quite exciting for techies because people are actually using technology now. There are some benefits to this, but I guess the highlight point is there is a limit. You can't automate everything because there are some bits where if you automate it, you're putting yourself at risk.
Yeah, I mean, things like SPV automation that Jacob referred to documentation, maybe the subscription onboarding process, client management systems. These are all areas, and as you've said, George, maybe scraping together, notes from different systems, but these are all operational efficiencies that firms are now benefiting from. I take your point. You can only go so far with these things, but any incremental gains that you can make are to be welcomed. So I think there's plenty of scope for where that automation trend is likely to continue to go. But I want to move on to one of the key points that all firms have to be very mindful of now when working remotely, and that is obviously the cyber risk that comes with that. I think we've already heard on this panel today that there's a lot more collaboration going on, a lot more discussion, document sharing even, some of which is going to be very, enticing to a bad actor. So again, this is one of those risks that we all need to be aware of. Maybe George, I'll start with you just on how you see the threat landscape maybe evolving this year, and anything that you would really single out in particular. It's an ongoing issue for all firms of all shapes and sizes.
I think the bad actor thing is obviously a big risk, right? And or insider threats, as we call it, because, like I was saying about I think you mentioned the water cooler, and I tend to drift towards meeting someone for a coffee because I drink too much of it, apparently.
Yeah.
You you only need a couple of minutes with someone if you've been a leader or a mentor or an employee for a long time, and you can see that there's something wrong. And without the ability to do that, it's very difficult for HR functions to know when someone's thinking about leaving. And unfortunately, you know, especially in the other side of our business, which is hedge funds, IP information tends to be on a spreadsheet. And I think the way that we're all talking about working collaboratively here with documents in Slack, you know, SharePoint, Teams, things like that, there's a huge opportunity for someone to download stuff if it's not configured right. It's very, very easy for a firm to lose track of where files are. I remember doing an audit for a company once, which had become a PLC, and they'd been using Dropbox for a couple of years. And I said to them, you know, how do you manage the systems as to who shared what? And I remember the CEO going, what do you mean sharing? It's just for staff. I said, okay, well, I'll do a quick download audit. And they were sharing it with sort of 60 Gmail accounts, none of which they knew who they were, because people just right click and sharing. And the data governance bit is huge. And there's loads of tools out there. I try and encourage people, without mentioning the word GDPR, because it's a very boring subject, but to use things that are built into these tools. You know, information rights management means that you can create folders within your structure that says, you know, any file that's in here, you can't attach to an email, or any file that's in here, you can't download and print, and trying to use that IRM data categorization to help limit some of the risks. And then I think, you know, there's a huge area which we've been in for a couple of years now, which is about doing behavioral analysis on the devices for the use of the device and the data movement, rather than using traditional antivirus tools and things, so that when people do start behaving in a different way, not talking to someone about what's going on with the work, but if someone's not happy in their job, they start using the tool and the data in a different way. So we use an agent on the endpoints of our clients, which feeds into our scene, like it's a security operations center, but rather than focus on data breach risks and where the data is on its own, we do behavioral analysis on how they're using the data. So we don't look at the content, but it's like who's accessing what file, creations, modifies, deletes, things like that. And then we use another tool which actually tracks the time spent within applications, the CPU and RAM usage of applications of that individual. So we know, for example, if someone's got a browser open with 1 tab or like 10 tabs, because it's using more processing power on the computer. The same with Excel. And that information combined, and this kind of ties with automation and AI, allows us to set notification alerts based on strange behavior, which we can then send to HR and say, by the way, we think you should monitor this individual for the next couple of weeks because they're acting strange, or they're trying to access files that's got the company's IP on, and they're working in the admin team, you know, or they're working in IR, but they're trying to access the portfolio manager's spreadsheets. They can't because we've got security, but they've tried it more than once. It's not normal. So I think using those combination of tools can help bring that risk down. And then the other thing is a small thing that we were talking about the other day, which was about using geographical locations to protect the business. You know, within Office 365, you have something called conditional access. So we know if we get an alert to say, you know, I'm going to pick on Jacob. Jacob's just tried to log into his email from San Francisco and Moscow at the same time. We know that there's something, you know, which has got one of our client staff in trouble once, actually, because they were supposed to be in a meeting in London and they were actually in Brazil. And we were concerned because it was an unusual location for that individual, but they'd gone there to visit family or something and didn't want to let their employees know. So
yeah, no, that's very interesting. Again, that this is where maybe the cyber tool kit is evolving by using AI. That kind of, you've talked about applying behavioral analysis to how work, you know, the employees are maybe trying to access documentation, that they shouldn't be, or parts of the database that they shouldn't be, which ties into what we was talking about earlier with the well-being of employees in this current environment. So I mean, the GPS point, very interesting, because that again touches on how to mitigate against ID fraud, which is a big cyber risk at the moment, where people's credentials are being acquired and people are pretending to be who they're not. So, I mean, Jacob, how do you think about these cyber risks and how you keep Shasta as safe as possible? And if you want to touch on anything that George has just alluded to there.
Totally. Well, we have the benefit of investing in cybersecurity, so we also end up adopting a lot of cybersecurity for our own firm. And so one of the things we noticed right as COVID happened is everybody was working from home. But guess what? So that meant monitors were going home, cords were going home, new pieces of software were getting purchased from home in order to help people do their jobs. And this was actually, there's a company that we had invested in called Umnitsa that focuses on tracking assets. So what are the company's assets? Their hardware, their software, their desks, their lights. Like I have 3 lights now that the company bought me for this exact type of thing. And those are all the companies. So how do you actually start to track all of these assets? And so that is one, a company called Umnitsa that we work with. And then another one is totally focused on phishing. And I agree. I think email phishing is one of the scariest, things that happen. Someone logged in from Nigeria into my account, and our Microsoft administrator noticed that, shut the account down, and it was a security breach. So on the phishing side, there's a company called Valley Mail that we work with that focuses primarily on authenticating the consumer or authenticating the user, tracking all email, looking for any suspicious activity. It typically sits on top of the Microsoft or Google stack. So it's an additional security perspective. And then we've adopted a new next generation VPN. VPNs have been around for a long time, but there's just a lot of user interface issues, but also you need to be able to just solve different attack vectors. And so there's a company called Banyan Security that we work with that now is securing our VPNs. And then the last one actually that Robert was just mentioning about kind of what is the human risk of people just either trying to access documents in the wrong way, or just people not adopting the security procedures that they should. And guess what? We're not in the office anymore, so our IT administrator can't come in and install the software. We work with a company called Elevate Security, which is kind of in between all of the users of the software and understand who is following more proper procedure and where are the risk points on the human level for who is not acting in a smart way. And then you can have our IT person go chat with them and figure out how do we either educate them to be a more secure operator or install software or whatever it is. Those are 4 companies that we've adopted very recently.
Yeah, no, that's good insight into how you're benefiting from the companies that you're investing with. And I'm sure, Robert, I'll bring you in here as well, that that can certainly that can make a big difference in terms of again limiting the potential risks at a human level. Have you had to think about the way that the company maybe is being attacked in terms of phishing attacks, Robert, and how you've had to try to remain, as secure as possible? And really, and I know that you're a small team, but where each employee thinks of maybe their home office as a satellite office, and that they need to get into those good habits.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a very early point, Party Par, really, we always started from a perspective of whatever you put into your systems to start with, and all the information we gather on clients and companies, just think of what would happen if it was on the front page of the Financial Times in the morning. Start off from that perspective. It's a bit like I told my son when he was young, on social media, just, think whatever you put up there could be there on there for everybody to see forever. So start from that perspective in terms of thinking about the data you store. And I won't mention the GDPR stuff, but I'll come on to it a bit later. I rather smiled when Georgie talked about right-clicking on the permissioning. And of course, when everybody's using different systems, and of course, you can't necessarily mandate, the limits to systems that you use, because when you're involved in certain transactions, the lead transaction guy may well say we should be using SharePoint, or it might be some kind of share vault, or whatever it might well be, and just right-clicking on a permission may expose that data hugely. So, I think we've all been there, and it's difficult to continue. But I come back to my kind of central point about the team and the people, and I think our perspective again has been around giving people the best tools and the best program of training and awareness to really keep them safe, and by derivation to keep us safe. And to do that in a way that it isn't going to overburden them. Put it back again to the fact that we're growing very fast. We have a small team, and you don't want to continually overburden them with more and more cyber training, for example. One of the things that I found very difficult, probably because we're very small, is engaging with good training and security companies. We're a tiny little firm, not very interesting for a big training company and for a security firm. So we went through several iterations before we found a firm or firms that we found would be at the right peer-to-peer level for us, and we can engage with them. And we've all been there in terms of finding the right people in those organizations that would resonate with our staff and build a relationship with our staff in terms of helping them. Because again, training and awareness isn't really about some kind of witch hunt. You're not looking to name and shame people. You're basically looking to have a very private experience one-to-one about the trainer trying to help somebody learn better practices. And that goes for me as well as everybody else, especially when you're in a hurry. I think I can't give any particular names, and maybe I really shouldn't give any names given the topic we're on. But what I would say is, we, again, back to the home networking and endpoint management, we spent quite a lot of investment on putting in, we're a small firm again, putting in home networks, endpoint management, managed peripherals, making sure that, the family aren't logging into mum's computer across our network to do whatever they're doing. And of course, then having our outsourced IT security and support people manage those peripherals and the endpoints of our network. And so that's what we've done. Again, many thought it was perhaps overkill, but we did that very early on. And I know hopefully it will stand us in good stead going forward. Certainly, our third-party security people, have marked us well for taking action, and that is reflected in our audits. And that, of course, all helps come full circle round when we're looking for more capital. And I'm sure, George, you would look for it in your DD as well.
Yeah, I think one key part of this mitigation of the cyber threat is how firms are now looking to centralize their data. So in terms of using data warehousing tools like Snowflake and being able to populate a dashboard with really good visibility on their data from a centralized point of view, as opposed to relying on multiple systems. By doing that, George, that goes a long way to maybe helping firms mitigate the risk that may come with using multiple systems and the kind of the spray effect that comes with in terms of sharing information. If you can centralize it, that maybe can go a long way to at least helping stay a bit more secure. Do you see that as a trend going forward?
I think there's a kind of high level viewpoint of the more systems you have, the more entry points there are into your network, right? And so my view is that the more read-only systems you can have, the better. And if you've got a load of different systems that all contain sensitive information, if you can centralize those, if you're extracting the data into a data warehouse, for example, like Snowflake, which I think everyone's heard of, massive IPO last year. you know, you can do loads of things around automation as well. Coming back to the last topic, you know, the firms that we've implemented data warehousing into, whether we're using Azure, Snowflake, or whatever, it's meant that there's not a two-way sync integration between systems. You know, it's a one-way sync. We can do analysis into their CRM, which then keeps them better informed about the performance of the portfolios, for example, and clients, things like that. Investor reporting is always a massively manual task for people. You know, you've got 3 or 4 people who spend 2 weeks bringing these massive reports together. If you've got a data warehouse, you could just automate the report, and then they're spending their time checking the content to make sure it's right. You know, we're doing some stuff with some big fund administrators right now to automate reconciliation reports, you know, present it through Power Apps on a mobile app so people can check live data transactions. You know, if you're assessing people's KPIs, like I talked about earlier with automation, you need that data in one place so you can track the performance of research analysts or that kind of thing. And I think all of the tools that we use in our space, like investor reporting or investor portals, all of this kind of stuff, if the data, if we can get away from having situations where we're sending files back and forth, or we're sending a PDF out to somewhere where you then have to use products like Vera to track who's opened it and things. If it's all read-only and online, you can't print it, you can't download it, you can't ship. It's much safer. But the other benefit is that you can update this stuff live then, recreating it. People can get better information, they can track it, and get menial graphs, all of this kind of stuff. So it's the way everyone's going to go.
Is that also then when you think about this concept of containerization, and I think what we're alluding to here is the need for endpoint security in an officeless work environment. So there are now these very well-known products like Citrix and SharePoint and so on that one can use as a containerized concept, if I can just call it that. And maybe you can explain, George, why that is perhaps helping, again, maybe limit the way that employees are accessing and controlling the flow of data within their organization, as well as improve collaboration. This seems to be quite an important step as well, this use of containerized products. I think
containerization is always existed. If you think, as you've rightly said, Citrix, right? It was there originally as a way for people in a BCP or DO environment, and they didn't have a machine at home. They could enter a virtual desktop through a browser, basically, and then you can containerize that window so you can't print or download or anything. But, you know, whatever happens, you can still take pictures with your phone. You know, or do a print screen, although some of the systems can block that as well now. And it's just, I think the key thing really is the way that all of us are working on this panel now, and I'm sure many of the people listening, is taking that a step further so that now you can populate a folder on someone's home machine or hopefully corporate device, and then whatever files are in that folder, you can limit what can be done. So you can't copy and paste out the folder, or you might have a folder called HR where all of the files are read-only, they can't be downloaded, they can't be printed, etc., etc. And it's just taking it a step further with containerization, which then helps us with collaboration. You might have a Teams channel where every file that's shared within that Teams channel can't be edited or printed or anything like that. And it's really taking it to that next stage. And that's what we're seeing most people using these days. I personally have a vendetta against Citrix, so I'm trying to get people
away. Jacob, are you doing anything along those lines at Shasta, where you're again maybe just allowing people to share and update files, but in a read-only format, and you know, that again is just helping. Just.
Yeah, we probably have a lot to learn on this one. You know, we're not a registered broker dealer in the US, which means we don't need to fall under a lot of the traditional kind of investment bank or publicly trading firm audit compliance. There's kind of a private equity exemption said in another way. So that means that we're not forced to adopt a lot of these types of document controls. I wish we had them. We have controls on our computers so that can be centrally shut down through the IT department. But for the most part, it is a more trustful environment. But we have a lot to advance.
The opposite of zero trust. Lots of trust.
yeah, exactly.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah. I'm just, as the last few minutes, maybe just to looking ahead, and we touched on quite a few areas that are all very relative to, very relevant to how firms can think about agility and staying safe at the same time as being more efficient and more collaborative. One of the trends maybe that we might see going forward are thinking about the use of apps that keep safe. You've developed a track for your engineers and for them safe, as well as your clients. Do you want to have a quick, just a quick word on that? And I know that companies developing similar types of apps. So George, I think that would be a good one to kind of, just as a look ahead kind of concluding thought, if you could share an insight on that.
Shall I go first, Jacob?
Please,
I think, so we basically, James is alluding to, we developed a track and trace app for a load of our clients during COVID because unfortunately or fortunately, quite a few of our clients chose to ignore the pandemic and still wanted engineers to come and visit them in office and homes and things. So we had to develop very quickly a track and trace app for our staff and clients. And it's one of those scenarios where I thought afterwards, I wish I'd commercialized this. You know, and it went as far as some of our big PE clients. We were sort of doing kitchen area, desk booking, bike rack bookings, things like that. But obviously, if I have an engineer who comes back to the office and says, oh, I just got tested positive and I've been to 5 different clients in the last week, we needed to immediately know, you know, and vice versa. So these are some of the things we've developed, but I'm kind of hoping that after COVID's over, we're not going to have to worry about stuff like that. But I think more and more tools will come out around an HR aspect of everything that we're doing. You know, team motivation, virtual team motivation tools, you know, HR tracking of who's been where, who's come into the office when, all of that kind of stuff. That's going to be the trend, I think, going forward.
Yeah,
Jacob, yeah, sorry, Jacob.
No worries. I was just going to jump in. We've been looking at different solutions from an investment perspective, both ones that use your phone, you know, elements of your phone application, but certainly there's identity concerns with the phone. And so there's other solutions that use cheap hardware dongles that can attach to the employee badge, that is essentially anonymous and encrypted, but can still track the person, and then your IT department can understand who it was. We think that hopefully we're not going to need them in the future, but you know, the cost of shutting down is so great that it may just be an additional marginal cost that what companies are willing to bear in the just as an insurance policy, so they don't have to shut down as brusquely as they did.
Look at it in a different way. Yeah, we're quite a small group. So just looking at it from a different perspective, from a client service perspective, I think what's interesting is if you take examples of the entertainment industry, there is obviously a huge wave of new technology coming out through streaming and from augmented interactive tools. So again, we are very much more of a firm that is a high touch, well, prior to COVID, a high touch point in terms of speaking to entrepreneurs, speaking to our clients. And clearly we've not been able to do that with the COVID sort of era. But what we are very much doing is picking up on some of these the streaming technologies that are coming out now that you see all the time, and the augmented interactive technology tools that are coming out with that to make that client service and that interactive experience with clients and with staff, you know, a lot better and a lot more informative. So, you know, it isn't necessarily a tracing technology, but I do see it, to your point, of being a COVID-related technology trend, this whole area of streaming and augmented interactive tools.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Yeah, and just to kind of introduce the ongoing IT risk, I've been absolutely chewing through my battery, and I've got 2% left, and I'm terrified I'm going to lose you. So this is the problem of using Firefox. It's just, gosh, it's just, yeah, my battery needs to be replaced. It's one of those unintended risks of technology. It's been fascinating to get your views on this. George, I don't know if you, well, just for the audience though, we've got another 13 minutes where if anyone would like to go into the networking, just to do a bit of one-on-one, please do take use of the time. I think, George, did you have a last, just a concluding thought, just to wrap it up? Obviously, I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you for sharing your thoughts today. But George, if you have a final word on what we've discussed, and I'll let you go for the networking at that point.
Yeah, I think to sort of wrap up our session, which I thought I was going to have to just say what you just said, because we lost you for a minute, so I'm glad you came back. I think the focus this year is obviously going to be those two major elements we talked about around collaboration and containerization of the files, you know, allowing people to work as flexibly as possible, but in a secure fashion. I think looking at the relationship costs between technology and this whole digital transformation, which is collaboration essentially, thinking about agile working, the risks of people who are on the move, those kind of home networks, airport networks when we get back into it, and looking at the data centralization and cyber decentralization. They're the kind of key areas. And then I think about mental health elements, keeping people motivated, making sure staff are safe. They're the key areas, I think.
Well, no, I mean, that's very well summarized, George. And I think, again, all really important areas for people to think about. And to Jacob and to Robert, I wish you all the best for the year, and hope you stay safe and productive, and
Thank you.
do plenty of deals this year. George, it's always a pleasure, and I'm sure you'll be very busy keeping your clients very safe and agile this year as well. So thank you to the audience, and look forward to connecting with you all soon, and pleasure to speak with you all today, and thank you all very much indeed.